Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I have a different channel, an older channel, a more popular channel where I've done video collections about popular music and about future predictions. And this is because I discovered a website called futuretimeline.net where they have like a timeline of what they predict, some of the predictions they expect to happen all the way from like the next few years to the almost the end of the universe. And I did some videos about some short-term predictions for like the 2010s, 2020s. Anyway, I did some of those videos. They were popular, but they were never my own predictions. So in that channel, recently I made a video with my own predictions. So based on the things that I've read, based on the videos I've watched, based on the information I've gathered, I built some sort of timeline, so to speak, about events that would happen in my lifetime. So I made the video, and it's like a 16-minute video. There'll be a link to it in the description. There has it's synced to the music, so it's like a nice experience, even though the predictions might be pessimistic in some way. But I wanted to dive deeper into some of the predictions I've made, just so I can justify some of the things and some of the reasons and some of the caveats of them, because in the video they're very short sentences and they actually miss a lot of the context required to properly understand them. So that's what this video is going to be about. I've cut up some of the most relevant ones to comment on, and I made them as a screenshot, so I will be showing you a slide of them instead of going through the video, because that might be confusing for you to pay attention to different things. And one of the first things that I wanted to cover was the concept of climate departure. Now, I've been paying attention to climate change for many years now, all the way back since 2005, I would say. And I had never actually heard of this term before, and I shared it in other places online, and many people had not. This comes from a paper from 2013, if I'm not mistaken. And basically, in the video that I made, I show the different years when different cities in the Earth will reach this climate departure, and you can see the definition of it. Basically, it is when the climate changes so much that we are now in a new normal, so that every single year afterwards for that city will be hotter than that city's hottest year on that record since the Industrial Revolution, for example. So it's not in the video. It might, and I may have played with the music in a sense to make it look more dramatic, but it's not like the city immediately becomes unlivable. It just means that the city, for example, if Washington D.C. has a climate departure year of 2047, that means only after 2047, every year since will become warmer and warmer in a way that's kind of faster than what we've seen so far. So it's only maybe 10 years from now in that city, which Washington D.C. So if Washington D.C. reaches its climate departure year in 2047, it's only maybe in 2057 that it's really unbearable to be there anymore. So that's one context of this climate departure that's spread throughout all of the video that I made, and it's important to keep in mind. So the city doesn't immediately become unlivable, but it's really hard to live on it because the weather keeps getting worse, the temperature overall keeps getting hotter, and it kind of begins a process of infrastructure collapse, in a sense that the costs to live there just increase so much that people will just migrate somewhere else. Okay, so that was the first concept. Then the second one that I mentioned, I'll start going now. This is where the video actually begins. It's when I start from this year 2020. So I kind of expect that we are currently living through a pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, but I actually expect, and this might be pessimistic on my part, but I expect we will have a second pandemic declared. And I came up with the number or the name COVID-20. It's very unimaginative, but it kind of makes sense. So the current one now has spread so far and so wide. Many people have got it. Even if you just look at the number of confirmed cases, that's at least 13 million as of the recording of this video, I think. But we know many more people have caught it and they have not been tested, either because there were not enough tests available, or the countries didn't really prioritize that, or they had very light symptoms or no symptoms at all, so they didn't even know they had it. So you can easily multiply that by 10 times or even 15 times. So we're now in the hundreds of millions of people being infected, or so far, and we still have 7 billion total people on the earth. So there's a lot to go. But if you consider that each individual has, when they get infected properly, even if it's light symptoms, they will have many millions of virus particles on them. So if you have hundreds of millions of people, each one of them with millions or billions of virus particles, just the sheer chance that there will be a mutation is unequivocal for me. And in the video description of this video, the future lifetime video, I shared some resources showing exactly that we already know there have been several strains of this pandemic, of the virus of this pandemic. And one of them in particular, which is called D16G, has already been shown to be, I don't know if it's more deadly or it's just it spreads more easily. So I think that at some point, it's very likely that there will be a new pandemic declared, so to speak. So we'll be kind of juggling with two pandemics, or at least the first one is already on the decline, but we already have the second one. And this is kind of similar with what happened with the Spanish flu, because it came in waves, but actually the waves meant that it was a completely different virus because it had mutated so much. So the first wave didn't kill that many people, but it was a second wave because of the mutation that became much more deadly. Now, I'm not saying this mutation would necessarily be more deadly, just that it's enough of a change of the original virus that it could be considered a mutation and therefore a new pandemic. Okay, all fair and good. Let's go to the next one. I think this will not come as a surprise to many people. The question really here is just how bad it's going to be, because the economic effects of this pandemic, they come a lot from the response from governments that, they prevent businesses from staying open and they tell people not to go to work. But people by themselves, by their instinct, they were the ones that started this decline in economic productivity. A lot of people knew there was a virus going around, and instinctively they felt, I don't want to go to crowded places anymore, I don't want to go outside so much anymore, I don't want to travel anymore. So in 2020, early even, we already started seeing a big decline. But I think it's only going to be really in 2021 where the writing is really going to be on the wall, and nobody's going to be able to say, oh, we're just going to come back from this very easily. Because as we have seen now, since the beginning of like February until July now, many big, powerful countries have failed to properly control the virus, either because of political beliefs or just because of misinformation going around, or just because they have other economic interests that they think is more important at hand. And when I call it the second Great Recession, this is of course mentioning that we had a first Great Recession in 2008 with the housing bubble. So my doubt here would be if this actually is only going to be a Great Recession, because I don't think it will just be a recession. It will be a Great Recession because it's a very sudden, big shock to the economic system. But there is still the doubt that it might become a depression, although I don't think so, because governments nowadays have many more powerful tools, and we have a lot of knowledge that will prevent us from reaching that depression stage that happened in the 30s. So we know a lot more about how economics works, macroeconomics, consumers, spending, budgeting, finance, all of those things. We know a lot more now to prevent the world to reach that depression. I think and I hope, anyway. So by 2021, and this number, I mean, it sounds really unrealistic. It sounds like I'm really scaremongering or something, but the mortality increase of this virus so far has steadily kept around 1% a month, I think. So if you just run the numbers conservatively, you will reach this 10 million dead by 2021. So right now, I think we haven't reached a million dead. We are about, I don't know, maybe 600,000. I haven't really kept with the numbers lately. But 10 million is not that unrealistic, considering how, again, many countries have failed to contain the virus for numerous reasons. And notice here I say ongoing pandemic, so I'm assuming by now also that there are these two pandemics going on, not just one. And even though the measures to fight one virus will be equally as good for the other one, because it's not that different, still, it's just that kind of a virus that it's very difficult to contain, because if you try to contain it the traditional way, the economic impact is so great that it's almost unbearable. So people try to find a compromise, but that just means the virus keeps spreading. Somehow it finds a way. So yeah, I think 10 million is unfortunately something that will happen, and this is assuming only the 10 million of the people in the risk group, so older people, people with already pre-existing conditions, not healthy young people like it happened with the Spanish flu. That is at least, that would be a silver lining to the ongoing pandemic, I would say. Now for a completely different switching of topics. This is throughout the video I talk a lot about electric cars and their disruption, and I have been involved with the electric car world, so to speak, since at least 2010. So I know a lot about what's going on, and it will be a big disruption that people will feel like it came out of nowhere, but the writing's on the wall since at least 2008. And conventional automakers, they have been very slow to update their fleets to electric cars. That doesn't mean they haven't provided an electric car solution, but they have done it. It feels like their spirit is not really on it. Personally, I feel like, for example, if you look at other car companies that have pushed it more, and I can think of Tesla is the obvious one, they have really gone all in. They have tried to make their car the best car possible. They didn't just come with an existing car, made it electric, and they were happy with it. No, they've really pushed the research and development in that sense. But because of conventional automakers, they have so many stranded assets in the existing car. So they have all the factories that make the internal combustion engine cars. They have all the car parts. They have all the cars. They have all the infrastructure, the workers, the research they've done. They've sunk already so much cost into the existing way the cars are made and they work, that it's much more costly for them also to turn the ship around and go full electric, or go into electric cars with a bit more energy and yeah, I don't know energy, I guess, is a good way to call it. So in a way, it's in their best interest to try to delay any possible legislative punishment that might force them to come up with more solutions for electric cars more quickly. So, for example, in the EU, there's a big law that was going to come into effect in 2021 because the EU had set certain goals for greenhouse gas emissions, and they really wanted to push the car makers to move ahead. And we already knew that the car makers, they were not going to be able to deal with this. So for some car makers, they already they had made some calculations, and they thought, okay, we'll just pay the fines. It's okay, because we just earn so much from the combustion cars, and the market is still not there, they say, for the electric cars. They will just pay the fines, and that's it. But I think that they're actually going to push back these targets, not only because again, they have such a big investment in the way things are now that this pandemic is also coming into this now because it has lowered dramatically the purchases for combustion cars. I read somewhere that just the purchases for conventional cars have decreased as much as 80% in some places and as low as 50% in other places. And car makers are just not going to be able to handle that much of a drop in demand, plus that they have to put up so much more money in investment to come up with the new cars at the same time. They don't have the money for that. So if they can, but they do have money and some power to lobby, I think, because they will say, "Oh, people stopped buying the cars. Yeah, we need time for this. We need time to deal with this. This came out of nowhere." And even though they knew this emission threshold was going to come into effect in 2021, they're going to say, "Oh, but the pandemic changed everything. We can't really do that anymore." So I think in the end, they're going to be able to push back, um, even though that's just going to affect them worse later on. But again, yeah, that's just the way things are. So I think that's all I have to say about this for now, but I'll go back into the topic soon enough. Now, one of the reasons why I think that what we will live through will not be a Great Depression and instead will just be a Great Recession is that the governments have a lot more tools to fight this massive drop in economic activity, and they are willing to use it. Already, we have seen that the US, for example, has used one of these helicopter money approaches. Helicopter money basically means that you just give money to the citizens directly in hopes of restarting the economy. And this is opposed to what they did previously, which was to provide liquidity or to provide money for the bigger institutions, and then that would sort of trickle down through indirect measures into restarting the economic activity. So one of the things they used to do for the 2008 crisis was to lower the interest rate so people could borrow more, create more businesses, and hopefully they thought they would kind of restart the economic machine. Now, the economic machine did restart, but it was kind of sluggish at best to restart. And the interest rates never really picked up. So they were really low when the pandemic hit. So they couldn't lower it further because that wouldn't make sense. So, for example, the US, I mentioned, they took the initiative with this, and they actually gave people some money as like the first helicopter money approach in history. So I don't know the specifics about that. Some American people will know. But if you filled certain requirements, you would just have to fill, I don't know, some document online, and then you would get a check with money during a certain month, I think. And then you could use that for whatever you wanted. It could be paying rent. It could be to buy whatever you wanted. Nobody really checked what you use it for. But because of the pandemic and because people were scared and they stopped buying so much, the government providing this free money, so to speak, in kind of guaranteed that some money would be spent because, hey, it was free money and people didn't mind just spending it. It's still to be known exactly how effective this will be, because if people are truly scared, they might just hoard that free money, and then the stimulus doesn't happen. The money is just hoarded and it doesn't move around the economy, so it doesn't do anything. But I think many more countries this will become commonplace to fight this new recession, because it's a more direct way of stimulating the economy than just indirectly through lowering the interest rates, which they can't do anymore. So in Europe, as you know, we had a certain first wave of the pandemic, so to speak, and this began most notably in Italy, but Spain also had a very bad part of this, and I think Portugal is also increasing now. I don't know about Greece, but these South European countries, and especially here I'm referring to Spain and Italy, which are also very big countries in Europe, because of their location, because of the, I don't know, the culture and the tradition of Europe overall, they are quite reliant on tourism. And because of the pandemic and the nature that it affects the economy, it actually stops disproportionately tourism than other industries. So if the South European countries will not get some sort of relief from the European Union, and they have tried already to get this, but they voted on something I think was called the Corona bonds, but it was rejected. That was for Italy, I think. If they don't get this relief, considering how dependent they are on tourism, they will face a Great Depression, I think. And for context, some of you might not know, but Greece actually faced the Great Depression in 2010, 2012, I think, because it was one of the hardest hit countries with the housing bubble in 2008. And because, again, there was not that relief given to it, and other factors, of course, come into it, corruption and people emigrating and yeah, other things. Because of that, it actually had a Great Depression. There was that big of a contraction in the economy to be considered a depression. So yeah, I think this is bad news, of course, but not much we individually can do about it other than vote. So going back to the cars now, since you remember I mentioned that the automakers pushed for those emission penalties to be pushed forward, but in my opinion, that really wouldn't really stop what was already in motion, which is that they are simply too big to be able to change in time, considering the speed of the disruption that's happening. So I say here that most traditional automakers have either gone bankrupt, merged, or significantly restructured. A few had the political pull for a bailout. Because I think it's quite obvious that some of them will be bailed out. They will tell the governments, listen, if you don't help us, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, and there's a pandemic going on, and there's a recession. Do you want that to look good for your election? You know, people are going to kind of blame you also. So I think they will be able to get this bailout. But many will also go bankrupt, or they will just merge. There will be many acquisitions, I think, of, I don't know, I'm thinking about Ford, I'm thinking about GM, I'm thinking about maybe some of the more American ones, but also some European ones might be severely affected. I don't know, Citroën, Fiat, for example. I don't know the specifics about that, but I have seen many graphs that show exactly how vulnerable they are, specifically to the disruption that's coming with electric cars. And both the electric cars and this new topic, they come from this Tony Seba that I've mentioned in my video about innovation. And so he predicts the big disruption with energy that I will mention also further in this video, the electric cars, self-driving, but also something called precision fermentation. So precision fermentation basically means that you can make proteins in reactors with bacteria or a culture of microorganisms. And here in 2023, he predicts that the cost of making those proteins will be the same as you raising a whole animal and then cutting parts of it to get the proteins in the form of, I don't know, beef, hamburger, whatever. So this is quite a monumental event, I would say, because to raise an animal to get the protein, there's so much waste. First of all, it's the time. An animal to reach harvesting, so to speak, it takes years. You got all the feed you got to put into it. You need the space for it because it's a three-dimensional being that occupies quite a lot of volume. It needs to move around also somewhat. You need to feed it. You need to give it water. It also releases significant greenhouse gases. So the fact that you can get just the same proteins, basically, the same food that nurtures us at the same cost, but you don't need all of that. You just need like a reactor where you can control a lot more things. That's big monumental change, I would say, and I'll talk about this even further in this video. Now, by 2024, I was predicting that individual ownership of new vehicles has dropped 70% due to reduced demand and cheaper leasing taxi options. So the reduced demand here, I think it's quite obvious with the recession and the pandemic going on. People are just not gonna be able to buy so many cars. They're gonna use bikes, public transport with the due precautions. They're gonna walk. I don't know. They can work from home even. They don't need a car. They can just telecommute. And at the same time, taxi options will be cheaper because a lot of new players will be entering the market. So already taxis have become cheaper through a disruption of called Uber or Lyft, or these companies that kind of network individual drivers and they kind of bypass some of the traditional regulations. But here it's this is also mentioning the advent of self-driving and how that will make also taxis cheaper. And just that people will not, and leasing a car will also be cheaper because you won't, yeah, it will just be cheaper overall to make a car because it will be electric, most notably, and I will mention that also soon. And yeah, people will just do the math and figure, yeah, I don't need to buy the car, then it just sits in my house 90% of the time, or it's parked somewhere 90% of the time, it's not being used. I'll just lease it and drop it off when I don't need it, or just get a taxi, which will be cheaper. So at some point, and I think that will be 2024, when people do the math, you will realize actually you don't need to own the car. Or it's in many places you won't need to own the car. Obviously, in some places you still need to. So that's an interesting positive thing, I would say. You don't need to own the car. You don't need the garage. All of those things. So here, now we reached what I would expect, the end of the pandemics, and this is controversial. First of all, many people will be skeptical that it will last 4 years, and I understand that. I have provided resources in the video description saying why I don't think, or saying why I think it will take this long. It's many factors, I think. First of all, it's the coronavirus. For example, the cold that we get every year, that's also coronavirus, and we have never been able to successfully make a vaccine for the coronavirus because as I understand it, the nature of a coronavirus or rhinovirus, or these viruses that cause cold, for example, in this case, these ones cause the pandemic. They are in such a way that they're very adaptive. So even if you make a vaccine, the virus is built in such a way, I don't know, that you don't really get that much immunity even after you got infected. So even if you develop a vaccine, it will not be that effective. So the theory that we will get a vaccine like this year or next year and everything will be over, I think that's unlikely. It's not impossible, but I think that's unlikely based on what I understand the virus is doing at the moment. However, this is declared over, and you can see it has the quotation marks, because I think these viruses will not really be over like the Spanish flu was. They will become endemic. I say here that they will be declared over in the sense that we will finally stop this uncertainty that we have right now, where some places are opening up, some places are closing down, some businesses are ordered to shut off because of a surge of the infections, things like that. Here, I mean that it's declared over in the sense that people are wearing, by now, 2024, people will be wearing masks much more comfortably and commonly. We will have much better therapeutics to treat people that are infected. Probably some sort of contact tracing will be more commonplace. So even if there's a big surge of infections, it will be dealt with pretty quickly. So I think the virus is here to stay with us. The pandemic, the sense of the pandemic as in it's a global spread that's uncontrollable, that will be over, but the virus will not go away. It will stay with us. So yeah, 4 years, that's a long time. When I think about it, I am not happy about the prospect that, and only in 4 years from now we will have learned to live with it, so to speak, that it's not that much of a problem. But that's the way it is, human societies. We can be quick to adapt to some things, but not to other things, and I think a pandemic is one of them. So now we come to one of the big landmarks in the disruption of electric cars. So I worded this very carefully, and it might cause some confusion for people, but I will try to explain it the best way I can. So I am saying here, and it's not really me that I'm saying it, it's actually Tony Seba, but I'm saying here that all new vehicles being sold by 2025 will be 100% electric. So if you want to buy a car and you go to a car leadership or you just go online to buy a new car, you will basically only see electric cars. And that's if you're an individual person that needs a car, if you're a company that wants to buy a fleet. Now, that being said, not all cars will be electric, in the sense that you will still be able to get some combustion cars or even other cars like hydrogen cars for sale. In the combustion case, I think there will be always collector cars or supercars that will be just too expensive for normal people to buy, but they're still being sold, so it's not really 100% that are being sold. But for all intents and purposes, for the common people, you will basically only have the choice of getting electric cars, because they will be cheaper. First of all, they will go so further now. I mean that they will have such a big range by now, by 2025, that you won't even think twice about comparing it with a combustion car. And secondly, when I say that all new vehicles being sold will be 100% electric, that doesn't mean that all cars on the road will be electric, because a lot of people take many years to switch cars. It takes, 20 years on average to change a car for many people. So obviously there will still be many cars on the road that will not be electric. There will be gasoline, gas, hydrogen, I don't know. But even so, all new cars that will enter the road will be electric. So at this point, there is really no turning back. There is no turning back. We are on the beginning of the exponential change. But by 2025, that will be an unforegone conclusion, as they say. So going back to the topic of precision fermentation, at the same time that is happening, there's been another revolution in protein making, which is cell-based. So imagine that instead of having to, so you have now, I would say you have three options. Either you grow the whole cow, for example, and that takes years, feed, water, space, all of those costs. You have the externalities, such as the greenhouse gases. That's one option. Then you have the precision fermentation, where it's not animal derived, but it's basically the same protein. So in that sense, you can go much cheaper, because it can come, from plants or from microbes or from other things. And then you have this cell-based meat, where you take a cow, you take a cell from it, and you grow the meat, which is cow meat. It is really cow meat, but the cow didn't have to die, and you didn't have to you didn't have to kill it, and more importantly, you didn't have all of those costs of growing the cow to the size that you could get the meat. So by 2025, again, Tony Seba was saying that making that burger from a cow that is alive will cost the same as growing the cow and then killing it and getting the burger. And I think you can see where this is going. The cattle industry is not going to end well on this. A spoiler alert. But this is a. I know I've read a lot about this because it's a topic that interests me because I am vegetarian. So there's also that ethical part of it. But to give you an idea, these cell-based meat burgers, they used to cost, I don't know, millions of dollars for one burger. Then it came down to $100,000, I don't know, a couple of, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. The last I had seen it, it had gone down to, no, not the last time. Then it went down to $100 a burger, which is still a lot, but it's a massive reduction from before. It's basically like the Moore's law of computation. You know, the computers get more powerful every year, and they take less space. It's something similar is happening with the technologies that are allowing people to make cell-based meat. So this will reach a point when it will cost the same, but it won't stop there. It will just keep going down. So it will actually be cheaper to get meat that came from a cow, but the cow didn't have to die, and it's basically cow. The cow cells are there. You might even be able to replicate the tissue so it feels like a normal burger, but it will be much cheaper. So that's a big transformation that's coming. Now comes perhaps the part that I'm less sure about in the predictions that I made, which is the economic part. And I mostly researched this part through an author on Medium and Ray Dalio, which is well known, investment guy that has written a lot of chapters for a new book that's coming up about, I don't know, how the economic empires are changing and things like that. So from what I understood from my research, by 2025, prices, interest rates, and taxes are going to increase because the economy is going to begin what's called a deleveraging. So when the economy is leveraged, that means there's a lot of debt in the economy, and it's not really being put in the best places or in the most productive places. And at some point, that reaches a tipping point where the economy has to get rid of that debt somehow because the unproductiveness of the economy is too much. And that can happen by the economic activity going down. But instead of a pandemic, which is an external factor, an external shock to the economy, this is an internal shock, an internal factor affecting the economy. So this process, from my understanding, begins in 2025, and you will see some repercussions of it later on in this video. But one of the immediate effects of that increase in things, this is also related with the uncertainty about Forex and fiat money, the money we use every day. Because there will be some uncertainty related to that, some other things will increase in value, and the most obvious things will be commodities. So like, I don't know, cotton, grain, gold, silver, oil even in some sense. Will kind of, that will go up. Equities, that means like stock, and some alternatives which have traditionally been more or less ignored, but I have noticed personally more and more people are in some way speculating on these alternatives, and I include here collectibles and crypto assets. So collectibles, that can be art, that can be video games, that can be, I don't know, trading cards like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon, and crypto assets, that you might have heard of that. That's like Bitcoin, Ethereum, things of that nature. So a lot of people will see a rising uncertainty in the Forex market, the treasury market, the sovereign bond market, and they will kind of flee to these safer, so to speak, alternatives. Now, this is, another controversial topic, you could say. The euro has always had its fair share of criticism as a currency. And but I think it is clear that the countries that are part of the euro, the eurozone countries, right now I believe they have a common fiscal policy, but they do not have a common debt policy, and that was very evident in the 2010s with Greece specifically, where there was a very high risk they would leave the euro because of that it could not devalue its own currency to change or to solve the problems that he was facing with the depression that he was having because of the housing bubble. So I put here two options basically, that either the euro has it solved, so the countries say, yeah, we had a good run, but this is not working out, we cannot come to an agreement. That can be very likely, I think. A lot of countries do not want to relinquish that final sovereignty they have into how they deal with their debts. Or it's also possible they actually might agree to finally have a common debt policy. So instead of investors buying German debt or Greek debt or Spanish debt or I don't know, Swedish debt, they will just buy European debt or Euro debt, which is what happens in the US. You just have the US debt. You don't get like Alaska debt or Florida debt or things like that, or California debt. So that is likely, and the timeline that I built on this video kind of assumes that they reach that, I think. But that doesn't mean there is still some downside happening. So because there will be uncertainty with the euro, the biggest trading pair in the world is the euro dollar. And because the uncertainty is in the euro side, that means people will go to the US dollar. So the dollar will be worth a lot more. And that might seem like a good thing at first. You can buy more things if you have dollars. But in fact, that will start a cascade effect. First of all, the US will not be able to export so much. But more importantly, and this is not mentioned in the video, a lot of countries have borrowed money in US dollars. And if the US dollar is now worth more, they will not be able to pay that debt back. So they suddenly become very constrained, and they don't own the currency, so they cannot devalue it. So they become in serious trouble, and I will mention that I think in the next 2 years here in this timeline. In the meantime, the disruption that has been happening in clean energy, notably solar panels and battery technology, so storing the energy produced from solar panels and wind energy, that will have dropped in cost so much because it's riding an exponential cost decline curve, that the traditional power industry, which is oil, and the newcomer, which was biofuel, they will have no option than to fight each other for the few remaining public subsidies that exist. So this might translate itself in, I don't know, some headlines where you see that the oil industry is going to Congress to ask for a stimulus package, or I don't know, if already this year you could see some big headlines about the oil price crashing dramatically. And that's a sign of things to come, in my opinion. So we will look back on, in a few years from now, to the headlines of 2020 about oil, and it will all make sense, in my opinion. But yeah, this is really this headline: oil and biofuel fight each other for public subsidies. That means they really cannot find that market that they lost anymore. Oil in particular might specialize, and oil and biofuel, they might try to specialize for plastic production, but that has its own issues because there's a lot of negative perception of plastic nowadays with the plastic pollution of the oceans, the microplastic issues, all of that. So, but they might still grab an extra market share from that. But the transport part and the energy production part is such a big part of the oil and biofuel industries that when they will lose that for renewables, they will not be able to recover from that financially. And because of that change that's happening, the first countries where I expect you would see, yeah, big change is the OPEC countries. So the OPEC countries are the countries that are the biggest exporters of oil. So you will see internal turmoil. Turmoil. You already see that with Venezuela, but that is not that is somewhat related to the cost of oil going down. But there's other factors in there. But because of the continuing decline of renewable energy cost production, so it's so much cheaper to make energy from renewables, these countries will have to adapt suddenly very quickly, and that will result in internal turmoil. There will be protests because the countries are so reliant on oil as their income that suddenly they might find themselves slashing benefits, social benefits, or increasing taxes, or things like that. At the same time, they will have to transition to renewable energies because they cannot justify spending money in an industry when there's a much cheaper way to make the same energy. Yeah, this is also very debatable. I'm put 2028 because I consider that the recession started in 2021, and the first Great Recession went from 2008 until 2015, more or less. So that's about 8 years or 7 to 8 years. So that's also the same range of years that I added here. Again, here I call it declared over in in quotes because things have been set in motion from what happened in the first part of the decade with the pandemic and other disruptions that now you will see in the next few years that I will show you what it, that a lot of problems are still coming. So the recession technically might be over because things have picked up, but there are other things happening in the background which will bring a lot of uncertainty. And because of the pandemic in the early years of this decade, and because of yeah other advances like automation, technological unemployment as a consequence of that, some countries will have started running universal basic incomes. Basically, you are alive, you're a citizen of the country, you just get a paycheck every month just for being alive. And then if you want to work, you can work. If you don't, you can just live off that, although I don't think it will be that much money. So it will be the bare minimum. That's why it's called the basic income. And the screen or the video I had chosen in this video for this section was that the Swiss parliament was voting on it. It actually it was rejected. But funnily enough, this year, 2020, Spain started what could be considered some sort of basic income program. It's not for everybody. You still have a lot of requirements, so it's not universal, and it's not really basic. So it is a bit basic, as in it provides enough as a relief for many people. But you could argue it's not really a universal basic income. But anyway, it has begun that process, and that's really I put here. It's running in some developed countries because not all of them will be able to accept that politically. Not all countries on the earth will have the resources to do that for their own citizens. So it's really only in some developed countries that I think this will happen by 2028. And I also added here a bit of a space exploration prediction. And 2028, some people might say that's very near, but actually the plan, according to SpaceX, is to land it on 2024, I think, or 2025. So I'm already giving it 3 extra years of delay. First of all, because they might encounter very difficult technical difficulties with the rocket launching and training the people to get there. Secondly, because there's only a narrow window where you can send people from Earth to Mars, depending on the location of the planets in orbit. So if you miss it in 1 year, you might have to wait for the next. So I'm giving that 3 extra years as like a buffer for the prediction. And this is also because the prediction originally was made by Elon Musk, the CEO of SpaceX, and he has in the past made some not so good predictions of his own for other companies like his Tesla company. So yeah, to be on the safe side, I added 3-4 extra years. So I think that that is doable if people are still investing in that. And as a side note, to keep the video a bit more light also, and that's something that interests me, to think of generations of humans. So we know we give names to generations, and we usually attribute them to certain characteristics. So you have the greatest generation, you have the baby boomers, you have the Gen X, you have the millennials, of which I'm a part of, the first digital natives, so to speak. Then you have the Generation Z or the Zoomers. But you get like to the end of the alphabet with the Gen Z, and I was curious, wow, what actually comes after that? So it turns out it's not a very imaginative name. It's called Generation Alpha, and they were considered as starting in 2010. So that means by 2028 they'll be 18. So therefore they're just entering the job market. So not much special about that. This, however, is a very, very big moment in our history, I would say. So oil, nuclear, coal, and biofuel, that's a lot of industries, will be either bankrupt or on terminal life support by 2029. And this is because by now, solar energy is the cheapest, most efficient form of unsubsidized energy generation anywhere on the planet. And funnily enough, this is already the case. Solar is already the cheapest. I think by 2018 that was the case. By 2019, unsubsidized solar was cheaper anywhere in the world. And I think by 2022 or 2024, I don't recall right now, and I didn't add it in the video, but by then, solar plus battery, that will be cheaper than the cost of transmission of the grid. So if you have a house and you're connected to the grid, the company that makes the energy, for them to send you the electricity, I think that costs 4 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour. But by 2024, if you have your own solar panel and you have a battery to store that, that will be cheaper than those 4 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour, which means that the company making the energy, the utilities, that they have to transport it to you, then they would have to make the solar or the energy at a negative price and then send it to you to be able to compete. And they can't do that, of course. It's not feasible. So utilities and all of these industries will be in dire straits, to say the least. Of course, many of them will have hopefully transitioned. We know that they're already investing in renewables to kind of to have a stake on that so they can survive. But yeah, most of the energy will be generated by renewables by 2029, basically. And this is, I think, the most optimistic prediction of the video. And there's a lot of caveats here. And this was also made by Tony Seba as part of his, I think, Rethinking Humanity book. And it says that the cost of the American dream, which he defines as follows, will be $250 per month. So basically living very well, or like a Western standard of living, will be much cheaper than it is today. And yeah, I can understand how that can happen, and that's why I added it in the video. Although, even though I would say that the cost to produce that dream, so that, for example, the transport cost will be, yes, cheaper. The energy cost will be cheaper. Food will be cheaper. Education will be cheaper. All of that will be cheaper. But at the same time, I think people will be poorer, and prices of taxes, for example, the taxes that are added on top of these things will be higher. So in the end, not a lot of people are suddenly going to become or going to be living the American dream. The American dream will be cheaper than ever to produce for more people, but still a lot of people will be rejected from getting it. They will not be able to because of these other costs that are happening. So this is the first time that self-driving is mentioned, and I think that really only by 2030 that will be when the transition is fully complete for self-driving. So obviously, I don't know, 2025, a lot of cars will already start being self-driving, 2027 even more, but it's only by 2030 that if you are there, if you will be alive there, you will look back and say, damn, suddenly I'm always in the car, but I'm not driving it and I don't own it, and it's electric, and yeah, I just go wherever I want and it's super cheap. But yeah, it's, if I look back 10 years ago, I still owned my own car. It was a combustion car. I had to drive it by myself. It was very inconvenient. So by 2030, that will be very different, and it will catch a lot of people by surprise. It is possible that the autonomy part will be harder to solve, and this might be delayed, I don't know, 5 more years, for example, 2035. That is possible. But so far, the trends that we see are clearly pointing out to this being the case by 2030. So that's, I would say that's good news. What's not so good news is the cattle farming industry and other livestock industry. So I think you can see where this is coming from. The cost decline for precision fermentation proteins and culture-based proteins was so great. That means the cost to produce them lowered so much that traditional farming of animals cannot compete with that. So they become bankrupt. And yeah, that doesn't mean animals disappear, the cows suddenly go extinct or something. There will always be small farms going around, but the industrial level of that is what goes bankrupt. They cannot compete. So there will always be markets, niche markets for smaller, for, I don't know, homegrown, organic, free-range burgers. That will always happen, in my opinion. But for most people, most of the food will come from this newer form of meat, which will either be precision fermented proteins, like plant-based proteins. I didn't mention some companies, but you can, I think it was, Beyond Meat was one of them that was working on precision fermentation, and there was another big one, Impossible Meat, I think. Memphis Meats, it was working on culture cells, for example. So all of that is happening already. The prices already are quite low for those burgers if you go to a restaurant. Not the culture one. The culture cell one, still not. But the other ones, the plant-based ones, yeah, they are going down already quite a lot. So yeah, by 2030, livestock business at an industrial scale will be very unattractive. It will be impossible to make it work. So only if you have a smaller farm and you sell a bit more expensive burgers or meat products of some kind, I don't know, people might value it more because it's closer to the earth or something. I could see that happening. What has happened also is that the effects of climate change have really affected people, especially in the tropics, and and I will talk into that a bit more in the video. But also, here I say that people have been pushed into poverty, and that's mostly because of the changes in the climate and how that affects agriculture. Because a lot of people are reliant on the climate, the way it has been, to expect a certain output of crops. And obviously, in some industrial nations, they are also vulnerable, but they will not suddenly be thrown into poverty. This is more in poorer countries where they cannot handle that sudden change, so they will become much poorer because of climate change. And 120 million people, that's a lot of people. And it didn't have to be this way if we had changed in time. So this is the another big controversial prediction, and yeah, a lot of people commented this on the other video, and I don't know what to say. It's technologically feasible today, and in fact, someone commented on the video that there was already a company, I think it was called Byte Labs, bytelabs.org or bytelabs.com, that they could make this work. So they just don't have the celebrities to do that. But I could really imagine that the cost of these things will be so lower that some rich people hidden, this will still be frowned upon, I think, because it's just such a weird concept that you could eat part of a person and the person is still fine sitting next to you. So I don't know, imagine I don't know, Leonardo DiCaprio, you are assuming he's still alive there, and he's into this, that he could like give cells to a company and you could eat a burger that's technically Leonardo DiCaprio, it's human meat. I don't know, it's a very uncomfortable topic, personally, but I added it because people have to think about that cultured meat enables suddenly a whole different range of things that were not possible before. This is just one of the things that occurred to me, and apparently it's already under research by some company, but there will be other consequences of these disruptions that we are living through that we cannot foresee yet. And they might be positive, or they might be negative, or they might just be really uncomfortable like this one. So if you remember, in 2028, I was talking about the uncertainty in the euro, and then also in 2025 that the economy was beginning the deleveraging, and that would reach kind of like a peak, according to the sources that I saw around 2032, with the sovereign bond market collapsing. So yeah, I don't know that much to go into technical details. I know vaguely that the sovereign bond market, that means the debt of whole countries, that not a lot of people, not a lot of retail investors, so to speak, the normal investors like you and me, if we wanted to buy that, we don't really, or those investors don't really buy those financial products so much, and neither do big private investment firms or just private firms. What does the institutions that are buying that country debt, that sovereign bonds, those are actually the central banks. So they're kind of buying their own stuff because nobody wants it so much. That's my understanding of it. But at some point, that reaches there will be some constraint to the system that is unexpected, which means that they will not be able to continue buying. I don't know, because if it's money that runs up, or the confidence goes away, or something happens, and then it will go down. And this will begin another series of effects, a cascade of effects that I will talk. First of all, and this was also related to the dollar going up in value, and people and other countries not being able to pay their debt. Well, what happens when countries can't pay their debt? Many things can happen. There are bad examples in history where they couldn't pay their debt and they were forced to pay it. So that was like Germany, and that ended up in the rise of fascism over there. But now we know about a lot more. So I think this will go more smoothly, personally. So there will be negotiations. Okay, you can't pay it now. Let's kind of delay it a bit more into the future, or you pay less overall, but you pay less of the debt every year, but you have to pay it for more years. In some cases, the debt will have to be pardoned. So some people will lose money and they will become poorer. This will be institutions or just retail investors. Some restructurings will have to happen. And restructuring here, we are talking about the country level. So the way the country is organized with their debt and the way the political part is included in that, and how they vote on that things will change in some way by this year. And unfortunately, that comes next. So at the same time that this has happened, because the electric cars have been adopted, air and noise pollution has reduced in cities a lot. I think that's very straightforward. There may be other consequences of the electric cars that we don't know yet, but at least this is something we know with a fair degree of certainty to expect. So if most cars will be electric before 2030, then by 2032 the difference will be noticeable in the cities. specifically in the city centers. This is what I wanted to say, that because of these restructurings going around, unfortunately, many pension systems will have defaulted. That means the governments will not have the money to pay the citizens the pension system that they worked for all their life. And this, of course, will result in protests, and a lot of turbulence is going to happen as a result of that. Now, keep in mind all of these predictions. I've chosen them and I've said them because I believe in them. I have reasons to believe in them. I have the sources in the video description, not in this one, but the other one. But even so, there is always a possibility that it's wrong, right? So maybe everything is fine in 2033. We don't know. The trend is looking like it's not going to be fine, and I hope personally it's not going to be fine. But I cannot just say it's not going to happen because I don't want it to happen. It might happen. There is a possibility. So yeah, just prepare yourself mentally if you can. I know a lot of people. I talk with people my age nowadays, and we all kind of know that the current pension system is unsustainable, and this is regardless of the economic painting that happened here in this video. Already, just because people are living longer and people are having less babies, it's a very big stress to the pension system. If you then introduce some, like a spark of the government debt suddenly becoming too much to handle and a lot of turbulence because of that, then of course a lot of pension systems will have defaulted. So a lot of people will either be forced to work until 75 or even 80 to get a pension. And even when they reach that age, the pension might be much lower than they expected. Or other things. I don't know the solution to this. I just know that it's a very big possibility. So still, as a result of all these big turbulent changes that were expected to be happening, and because a lot of countries had contracted debt in the US dollar and they could not pay it anymore, I think there will be a new reserve currency. Which means the US dollar will not be the reserve currency anymore. And I think the most logical thing to happen here will be that this international conglomerate of stakeholders will decide, okay, let's not just have the reserve currency as one currency of one country because they might abuse it. Let's instead maybe make a basket of goods and have that as the reserve currency. So they might invent a new currency. I don't know, might be called, I don't even want to guess what it might be called. Let's imagine currency X is the new world reserve currency. And in that means if you buy 1 unit of currency X, you actually get a certain percentage of euros, dollars, Chinese currency, Japanese currency, Russian currency, and maybe even throw some, I don't know, government debt, some private index fund stocks around that. So you could have something that's much more stable in a way than just the currency of one country. I think that's very likely to happen if indeed there is an event where the United States dollar causes that much big of an issue. Also, by this year, because of those declining costs of production of solar generation and battery energy storage, most houses will have some sort of solar generation and a battery to kind of offset when the sun isn't shining, and all of that will be connected to some sort of smart grid, so that depending on the cost of the electricity that's going around, you might be buying electricity or selling electricity. And this might seem like a weird concept, but it will actually make things much more stable because it's much more distributed. The production of energy will be much more distributed, and the storage of energy will also be much more distributed in the houses themselves, which is where they actually need to use the electricity. So I think this is a big positive step that we will see in our lifetime. At the same time as you have seen kind of the US with its reserve currency slowly disappearing, all throughout the years, and this is something that's been happening for decades now, uh, China has been increasing its influence in other countries, and I know that's fine. A lot of us have heard about Chinese investments in Africa and South America, and that is part of what I'm saying with this prediction, so to speak. Here, I'm talking about something differently, which is that the territory of China is no longer just the geographical part of what we associate with China already. It will include other things. Parts of Africa and South America and other parts of the world will technically be China, even though they're not recognized as Chinese territory, because the Chinese will have this soft conquest approach. So they will have made generous loans that cannot be paid back, and thus the countries that took the loan will kind of become vulnerable to China. China might also expand its territory actually physically by granting citizenship rights. So they might make a deal with some Southeast Asian country and say, if you want to be part of Chinese, if you want to be Chinese with all its rights, so I don't know, travel, maybe some basic income stuff, then you can do that. But that means you have to count yourself as China now, if you want to allow your citizens to enjoy that. And there will also be military protection deals going around. So China might say to a country, look, if you want military protection, we can provide that for you, but you have to like obey kind of our rules in a way. So I think all of this is very plausible. It has been happening slowly. By 2034, I think it will be more obvious than now. But yeah, that's why I added it here. I think this will happen. This is also another incredibly positive piece of news that will actually confuse a lot of people, because we have been going at the problem of greenhouse gas emissions with legislations and governments trying to work out a deal together that's not really been working out so well. And in fact, according to the current trends, again, this is another prediction by Tony Seba. He thinks that the emissions will actually drop more than 50% by 2034, purely for economic reasons. So this means that it's not because there were penalties for using fossil fuels. It'll just be people and governments will switch to better renewable energy, more efficient transportation, and also less wasteful agriculture, just for economic reasons. So they will save money by using renewable energies, electric cars, and getting their food by different methods than just raising livestock. So that is actually, when I learned about that, that was pretty surprising. Just purely economic reasons, a lot of the world will transition to less greenhouse gas emissions. Might not be enough, it might be too late, but just the trends that we see now will force that to happen just on economics alone. So that's pretty interesting to me. Now, this could be the prediction I disagree with the most. This is also a result of the Tony Seba prediction, the previous one. And he thinks that because of widespread telecommuting, self-driving cars reducing parking demand, and precision fermentation disrupting animal agriculture, that land value will have collapsed over 50%. So that cities will have to reinvent themselves, and there will be a lot of opportunity to move things back into cities, and that overall that's a net benefit, even though some people that own primarily real estate will not be doing so well. I think this is unrealistic, but I still added it because the land value is, it's the landlords that own the land, and they are a noticeable, throughout history, they have always been a very strong stakeholder of power. So they have never really let the land value drop that much, except on very rare occasions like with the housing bubble in 2008. So to think that just a technological disruption, because the land cost might actually be lower, but they may still charge the same amount to use the land for other reasons, because they rely, their income relies on those rents that they collect. So I think it is possible that the value land collapses, but I'm not so convinced. But I still left it here to give the benefit of the doubt to Tony Seba on this one. Yeah, this is another light topic of generations. So by 2035, millennials, Generation Y, they are expected to receive the most inherited assets. And this is because their parents, or the baby boomers or the Gen Xers, they have started to die off. So that's the sad part. They have started to die off. So the millennials are inheriting the the assets, and it is kind of funny that this prediction is coming right after the previous one, if you notice, which is that the land value has dropped by 50%, and then the next year, that's when millennials are getting the most inherited assets, which typically include land. So they finally, millennials have always had this negative. There's been a lot of articles written about how they haven't had it easy with the economic crisis and blah blah blah, and they finally were supposed to get something good out of it, which was the inherited assets, and they just decreased in value. So it's like, wow, they don't catch a break, you know. Yeah, that's kind of some light humor for this one, but yeah, that's just a light prediction. Not many consequences from this, I would say. This, on the other hand, is much more importantly. So, if you remember from what I've mentioned about energy becoming more decentralized, for example, transportation will also be more decentralized. Materials production, here I'm alluding to, I don't know, 3D printing, or just the fact that many people will have tools, either if it's printing tools or other tools, to build more locally. So all of this physically decentralization has been happening, which is great. But on the other hand, it is powered by software and intellectual property. And that will become more valuable than ever, which will give rise to these multinational megacorporations. And they will have a tremendous amount of power that we cannot even fathom so far. So if you think that Google or Amazon have a lot of power right now, yeah, you wait and see if this happens. Then this is gonna look like some sort of cyberpunk dystopia, I think. And this will affect some predictions from here on that you will see, because this power will translate, this economic power that they will have will translate into political power in some sense also. And yeah, this might seem out of the blue, this prediction. Um, this is somewhat related to climate change and global warming, but also to the fact that very big political blocs will have emerged by now, because I think countries will realize that if they come together in some sort of a bloc, a strong union, for example, or a federation, that they will have more collective power than individual countries. They might have to relinquish some of their rights in joining that that bloc or that union, but they will get so much more out of it. So I think by 2037 you will see a big American bloc, which probably still include predominantly the United States. You will see the European Union will probably still be around, and probably stronger even. So it might not be so much of a union anymore as much as a federation. And then in Asia, that there will also be some sort of stuff happening, and probably also in Africa also. So these multinational states, they will be much more powerful than even the most powerful states were, individual states were in history. And as such, they will flex their power. They will use advantage of their power, and that means that individual nation states will be more vulnerable, and they will try to fight to protect themselves from this back and forth of power flexing. but inevitably, many of the nation states, I think, will join these multinational states. So the process of agglomeration increases, I think. Not so, even also not so good news is that I don't know if you know, but we are currently living through a sixth mass extinction of wildlife, and by 2038 that will have continued to accelerate. And this translates more specifically in over 500 land animals declared extinct. So many of the animals that you know or you have learned about in history, or maybe you have seen in a zoo, they will be functionally exist. There will not be enough individuals of them in the wild to be considered a thriving species. So we will have expanded so much on the earth through human activity that we will just cause the extinction of these animals. That doesn't mean perhaps that you might not be able to see, I don't know, a tiger in the zoo or something, but maybe you will not see it in the wild except in very few nature reserves, very of the few remaining nature reserves. So yeah, not so good news, and yeah, don't think it will get better also after this. So throughout the video, I didn't add on this video, but there were always the timelines of, and this year this city reaches the climate departure, blah blah blah. But I think by 2038, on average, all tropical countries have already reached this climate departure. That means that for many of them, they have already lived through years of continuing rising natural disasters and warmer average temperature. So these smaller, more vulnerable tropical nations will actually want to become part of these multinational states first, because they need that climate change relief. The costs, the destruction that happens just because of hurricanes or floods or drought is just too great, and the cost of just living there with increased, I don't know, air conditioning or something else, or energy cost, or just fixing the infrastructure that's much more stressed, will be too much for them. So they will actually join a country or a multinational conglomerate of countries, and because of that, borders will be very different from today. I think even now there's always some new country forming or disappearing, or there's some civil war sometimes happening. But I think from that period onwards, borders as we know it will be very flexible. And this is perhaps the most important prediction, I would say. And I will make a video about this, a specific video about this particular one, which is that right now we are transitioning to renewable energy, but even though that will have tremendous positive effects, the renewable energy technology that we use requires a lot of rare earth metals, minerals, the extraction, the transportation, the refinement, the assembly. All of this industrial civilization we have is still very reliant on fossil fuels. Even if we don't use the fossil fuels to power the energy directly, even if we just use the renewables, we will still probably need fossil fuels to do things that we cannot do with the renewables. And we will still need to acquire a lot of materials that are finite on the earth, because the earth is just finite, it's not it's just one sphere, it's one ball. So unless we have expanded a lot to other planets, or started, I don't know, space mining to get other resources, or unless we have developed what I call low resource cradle to cradle biomanufacturing technologies. So this is the technology that does not have the downsides of what I just mentioned, of that we are, it's more renewable in a really true sense. It's more biological in a sense. It's very sci-fi sounding, really. Unless we have done that, uh, we're not going to be able to continue like this. So many civilizations will begin an irreversible process of collapse. There's just there's just not enough stuff in the world for everybody, you know, or to keep the same standard of living for everybody. So a way must be found for us to expand beyond these limitations that we have, or we will collapse. So yeah, very very sad and sombering thought, but that's how I see it for now, and that's how many people see it also. Now, if you remember to the prediction I said about multinational mega corporations starting to increase in power, in size and in power, and that affecting the political power, that translates into this prediction, which is that by 2041, the state power has become more symbolic. And state here, I don't mean like an individual country state, because most countries will be part of some sort of multinational state. But those multinational states still won't be as powerful as those multinational megacorporations, I think. So those megacorporations will have what we call soft power. So they will be influencing things behind the scenes. And we know they do that already through lobbies and such, and sometimes just sheer corruption. But this will be so commonplace by 2041, according to the trends that I see, that it's really gonna, the whole world is gonna feel very differently. And also, new institutions will have an incentive to be corporate rather than public because of this feedback loop that exists, that you can, influence politics in such a way. Yeah, the pyramid of influence is really inverted in a sense. Yeah, I don't know if I made a lot of sense with that one, but I'll leave it as it is. So by 2043, given that by 2038 most tropical regions of the Earth have reached that average climate departure date, by 2043, that's 5 years later, there will be a lot of refugees that will escape the climate and the infrastructure collapse. And biblical exodus of refugees is really an understatement, I think, to the sheer amount of human misery that is on the horizon. And yeah, and it didn't have to be this way, but it is what it is. So if you think the Syrian refugee crisis of the 2010s, if you think about that crisis, that all the refugees came to Europe, and all the political ramifications that are still being felt to this day since 2015, from one country, Syria, going into a civil war, the domino effect that caused in Europe. If you think about that, and then you think that whole regions of the tropics, so not just one country, all regions of the tropics will be feeling that. People will be leaving, and they just won't be leaving to the neighboring countries, first of all, because those are also being affected. They will have an incentive to move further and further away, and they will have to go to more developed countries necessarily, because they are still the ones not being affected as much. How will the countries absorb all of these people? There will not be resources for all of these people. Where will they go? How will they live? How will they live? I mean, how can we stand by and close the borders, for example? Because that, I'm sure a lot of countries will feel that that's the only thing they can do, in kind of like a way reminiscent of the movie Children of Men. How can that just happen, and you can just sit by and see the misery? I mean, some way must be found to alleviate this, because this will be unimaginable horror. This will be an unimaginable horror on the horizon, because we were too slow to act for climate change. So yeah, that was the really sad part I just mentioned. And I do add this caveat that there will be some sort of worldwide plan that will try to, climate proof, so to speak, and relieve these tropical nations and prepare the rest for what's coming. You keep in mind that by 2045, I think all energy will be renewable for sure. We will have transitioned probably in the 2030s. I think this is very unequivocal. But we will have also added so much greenhouse gases to the atmosphere that a lot of the damage will come, and we will not be able to also extract those greenhouse gases so easily. So we will have to deal with a lot of the consequences. And that's also why I say that this plan, even though it will be ambitious, it's a good thing that it's happening. It will probably help many people. I don't think it will be in the end very successful because it will not solve the fundamental problem that we have already added a lot of damage to the system, and maybe we even reach some tipping points that are going to collapse many other civilizations. So yeah, it's not looking very bright, I have to say, after this point forward. Yeah, not much more to say about this, I'm afraid. And yeah, as a consequence of the damage we have already added because of our activity and our emissions, I think the Arctic will be ice-free perhaps even before 2048. For the first time in recorded history, it will be possible to very easily cross that area because the ice will not be there, or will be very thin. And all while that is happening, a lot of humans again have been misplaced because of that. And where will they go? Because by 2038, on average, all tropical countries will have reached that climate departure. That means by the late 40s, a lot of the countries in that area, you cannot almost live there because the weather is so bad and the temperature is so bad, and yeah, the infrastructure has collapsed. But other countries more north or more south of the tropics keep reaching also that climate departure, and that means that in other areas the problem just keeps continuing, just at a slower pace. So I think overall, I think it was 2047, most of the Earth has reached the climate departure. So from 2047 onward, we will have that problem of the temperature increasing on average every year more than it has on that previous 200 years, and that's going to displace a lot of people. Where are they going to go again? Yeah, I don't have the answers. I'm sorry. I wish I could be more optimistic, or I wish I knew what to do. I'm just telling you what the trends are saying, which is that a lot of people are going to suffer, and it didn't have to be this way. And at the same time that is happening, because of other factors, and this is, I think this prediction came from Ray Dalio and the work I've read from him. He was explaining how the civilizations rise and collapse, and how currently the US is the de facto most powerful world empire, but at some point China, at least according to the trends that we are seeing now, will be the next most powerful world empire. And maybe it's not China as we know it, it's a more expanded China. Like I mentioned, maybe it expanded its territory. It's a very different China. Perhaps it's not the communist China that we know today, or it's a different type of communism, or it's a republic, or more importantly, China, a vague concept of China as we know it today, will be the most powerful by 2052, and that will have maybe implications in the way that I don't know, languages, maybe Chinese, some form of Chinese or a mixture of Chinese and English will become the new lingua franca of the world, or the international language. Or maybe the currency also, the Chinese currency will weigh more heavily on that basket of currencies that form the new reserve currency of the world. There's many unknowns. I think a lot of people are not surprised that China would replace the US, considering the trends that we see. But yeah, I think might happen earlier, might happen later than 2052. Ray Dalio, he said that this is likely, but he did not give a specific date. He published some graphs, and I derived this date from the graphs by extrapolating. Okay, it's moving. The graph is moving in this direction, so that means by this year, I think China will be ahead of the US. It's all in the video description of the other video, and I might actually add it on this one also. Another lighter topic to ease the mood a bit. So again, because Generation Alpha follows Generation Z, that means Generation Beta will follow Generation Alpha. And it's really weird, personally, to imagine that how, when you see a headline like this, you're like, these people who are not even born yet will start entering a job market. What will the world look like? It will be so different from what we know now. We try to make these predictions to maybe, or at least I try to make them, perhaps out of a sense of trying to make sense of the future and not feeling so much anxious about things we cannot that I cannot control. But it's still, yeah, exciting to try to think about the future, and these generations that will have their own culture, their own inside jokes, their own, yeah, music, art, all of that. We have no idea what it will look like. It will probably be very different. Us that we are alive now, if we are still alive then, we might feel very different about that culture. We might feel like old people feel about us now, like, oh, these young people with their weird music and weird inside jokes and such. So yeah, exciting for the future. And I think this is one of the last predictions. So because of that Arctic melting, or the ice being much thinner now, because of the melting of the ice, there will be a new route for traffic, for naval traffic, for commerce, for transportation. And previously, the only way to connect certain regions of the Earth would be through the Panama Canal, which if you don't know about it, I would recommend watching a documentary about it. It's really fascinating how it's actually it's a canal, but it doesn't actually connect. It's not like it's connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean directly. It's a series of, like, how would I describe it? Water elevators that are, or levees, I think they're called, that are used to they are manipulated to allow big ships to cross through that really narrow, but it looks narrow on if you look at the Earth from far away, but it's actually a really long stretch of land. And because that saves so much time to go through that Panama Canal, they can charge a lot of money. But because now there will be this newer Arctic route, perhaps they will lose their significance. Panama as a country might even change significantly because of that. Yeah, a lot of changes will come from this, I'm sure. So yeah, we've come to the end of the video. It's probably a really long video right now. Again, I encourage you to watch the original video because it's very different. The way I made it, has a different feel to it with the music and the transitions between the predictions. And I would appreciate your feedback on this. And if you have any more questions about the predictions, check the video description where I will put resources, and also feel free to comment and just ask. Maybe I will have the time to reply. But thank you for your attention. I hope I cleared some doubts from my original video, or some things that were not so that caused some confusion because they seem very unrealistic or so. Yeah, I hope this cleared it somehow. And yeah, thank you for your time, and see you in the next video.